about two of the recent publications we did in the cracking clean molecule project. The last one was published last summer, called indeed Recarbonizing the Chemical Industry. Maybe let me first try whether this works. Yes. Okay, yeah, like I said, I'm working as a researcher, or I conducted this research as a researcher for the Clingendael International Energy Program, and we indeed focus on a lot of energy discussions now at this moment relating to security of supply, but also increasingly so. CIEP was founded about 20 years ago by Dr. Kobi van der Linden, but also increasingly so we focus on transition in the industry. CIEP published quite extensively on refining and transition in the refining industry. And today I would like to focus for this circularity talk on the transition in the chemicals industry, specifically in one sector of the chemical industry, and that is organic chemicals, those chemicals that need a carbon atom in it. And the other distinction you can make in the chemicals is the inorganic carbon, inorganic chemical production, especially pertaining to, for example, ammonia production and fertilizer production. But that's not the topic of today, nor cement or metals. I like to focus on chemicals, and especially on the question of how to accelerate the feedstock transition in the ARA organic chemicals cluster. Well, I will later focus on what the ARA cluster actually is. We are in it. But maybe first, let's just present the outline for a couple of 5 minutes, and especially also why we would like to accelerate the feedstock transition. Well, I did, like I said, attend some of the previous lectures, and I heard also Professor sharing that he likes to start the first year lectures with coming up with definitions of circular economy. Well, a nice comment, especially I think we see a lot of different definitions and also reasons why to pursue those circularity goals. Well, I will not focus on all those goals for this presentation, but maybe it's good to establish that there are a number of ambitions and targets being shared on different levels. One of them is the EU level. It was a little over a year ago that the European Commission shared the ambition to have in 2030 at least 20% of non-volatile carbon use in chemicals and plastic production. Well, over the years and the months that followed, we saw a number of new publications, and not always this ambition was included in those publications and policies. But it's something that's developing, and also on the national level, of course, with the current cabinet has the ambition to better connect climate policy and circularity. But also we saw a lot of publications there, PBL, the Socio-Economic Board, and also a few weeks actually ago, the National Program of Circular Economy. So it's a hot topic that pertains to very different value chains, and one of them is in the chemical industry. What I'd like to do for the next couple of 20 minutes is just talk a bit about what the chemical cluster here in Northwest Europe actually looks like, how it could change, what the levels of change are, how that actually already is changing due to current and existing policies. We'll explore how that could change in the future with technical innovations, but also how these innovations relate to other changes in other industries that are related, and just like to end with some considerations for both policymakers and industry partners for the way forward. But first, let's have a look at what the ARA cluster is. It's the biggest chemical cluster in Europe, and it is quite unique in the world, as it is a chemical cluster that is crossing boundaries. It's partly located in the Netherlands, partly in Germany and west of Germany, and partly in Belgium. The largest cluster for transformation of hydrocarbons into organic chemical products. And just to give a sense of some volumes and the size of this cluster, I here included it's called a Sunburst diagram that we made for another publication that shows oil demand per energy carrier for the Netherlands. Well, you see in the inner circle that there are basically two types of consumption in the Netherlands. That is one side, the right-hand side, the domestic consumption, for example, for road transport. But also in the Netherlands, very large is the bunker market for, of course, the Rotterdam port and the Amsterdam port. Typically, those fuels are outside the scope of national policies, but well, here the Netherlands really functions as a supplier of these molecules, these markets. Well, if you look at how the domestic demand of oil looks like, I think a lot of people might think of gasoline demand. Indeed, for road transport, well, in addition, you of course have diesel demand, but also non-energetic consumption of fossil molecules. And naphtha is one of those categories. And actually, the demand for naphtha in the Netherlands is higher than the gasoline demand in the Netherlands. In addition to naphtha, also LPG, and then natural gas liquids are used to produce the various chemicals and plastics in the Netherlands. Quite substantial. And also, if you look at a global scale, about 40% of global primary oil demand is used for the chemical industry. Also good if you look at, for example, the IEA in their most ambitious scenario, the net zero emission scenario, you actually see not a decline of non-energy use of fossil fuels, but actually a slight rise, also in absolute terms. Well, that means that these net zero energy scenarios are not circular scenarios, especially if you look at the global scale. Just those discussions that are play globally are quite different from the discussion we see, for example, in the Netherlands. Why this is all relevant for many reasons. But of course, one is that in the end, these chemical products, end their life in either waste incineration or landfill currently, with quite substantial relating scope 3 emissions, so the emissions that stem from using and discarding these products. Well, if you look at the value chain of organic chemistry, well, let's start with just the products that are produced. You might think of packaging. Packaging is indeed a large subcategory within organic chemistry, polyethylene and polypropylene that they use for packaging, but also the automotive industry, insulation material, an area where we expect to see quite a rise of demand for organic chemistry. Paints, glues, textiles. Textiles is internationally also a very large consumer of organic chemical products. And then, well, you also you can think of it, but quite some products all find their origin in oil and gas through organic chemical production. If you look at this value chain, indeed it starts with crude oil or natural gas that's processed. In the case of crude oil in a refinery, then naphtha is produced, that's fed to a steam cracker, and then at different chemical plants, those organic chemical products are produced that then end their life in landfilling or waste incineration currently. Well, there are a number of, if you look at a systems level, how this value chains could change. In our publication, we make a distinction of 4 different ways of intervening in the value chain that over the years saw different levels of focus and attention in the policy debate. If we start, good to mention also in these refineries and gas separation plant, not only naphtha is produced, it's actually sometimes considered as a byproduct for the production of actually fuels or natural gas for heating and other purposes. But let's focus on how the value chain could change. One of the ways that could and is changing is through changing how products are made, so focusing on the process, either through increasing efficiency or through renewable energy consumption or or applying carbon capture and storage techniques. But at the EU level, we saw quite some attention already in this area since more than 20 years for some cases. For example, in the case of the EU ETS, it's also through the energy efficiency directive and the renewable energy directive. Well, other way of changing this value chain is looking at what happens with what comes out of this value chain. Well, also this is an area already in the 90s there were quite some attention on changing how these products are discarded through, for example, the Waste Framework Directive and the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive. And more recently, we see more attention on the upper side of this diagram, both by changing what comes out of the value chain, so type of products through to, for example, the single-use plastic directive. You might know of the prohibition to bring certain products to market, for example, straws and other products that are found in beaches quite often. But also I saw that the next talk that is scheduled is focused on the digital product passport. Well, that's part of the eco-design regulation. So that's just, well, here policy is trying to change this value chain through this lever. And of course, in addition to policy, we also see changes in the value chain, not as a result of policy changes, but also because just changing demand of new products that are brought to market at this lever. This, for example, is the change from polyolefins to more polyester production, so a new product that's brought to market, and then change the value chain because it's a new type of product. Well, more recently, we see more ambitions, like I mentioned, on the feedstock transition, so in changing on what goes into the value chain. So either using a different drop-in feedstock, and in the case of organic chemistry, that feedstock needs to contain the carbon molecule, and there are only that many carbon molecules in the world, and it needs to be found somewhere. And actually, the volumes and the masses of carbon the quantity of carbon that we currently use are very substantial. So we need also quite some carbon to replace those streams. Well, here over the past half year, we saw quite some discussions, both on the national and European level. For example, on increasing the recycling content of chemical products, that actually all the waste that is used and later processed is also actually used as recycled feedstock. But currently it's also for large parts debates and not very concrete policy or instruments yet. So let's focus on this area on changing what goes into the value chain. Like I said, there we need carbon, and there are three areas where you could find this carbon. That one of those areas is using plastic waste as drop-in feedstock, techniques that pertain to the chemical recycling technology, and you have very different technologies that are part of chemical recycling. I included some here. One of them is the pyrolysis of plastic waste. And then at various stages of the value chain, this pyrolysis oil can be fed into the existing value chain for pyrolysis that typically is at the steam cracker level. So the current infrastructure is used, but then with a different drop-in feedstock to produce what could be the same products. Also, other technologies are used, for example, gasification, either via methanol. So some new additions, new pilot projects that were announced recently to produce with chemical plastic waste syngas that's then transformed into methanol, and methanol can be transformed into olefin, and that olefin can be transformed into a polyethylene or another different chemical product. Also more downstream, we, for example, see depolymerization or solvation as techniques to produce these chemicals using existing infrastructure. Well, what applies for all these techniques, there of course are barriers to implementations. implementation of the process technologies. Also, in this field of circularity, the rule applies that there are inherent losses in the system, either through collection, but also just in the process of converting the plastic waste into a new product. We also have the challenge of growing product markets and especially the availability of pure waste streams. So that makes that we need an additional source of carbon. Well, that could be or prime candidate if there is a biomass as a drop-in feedstock. What you see here is that partly the same process technologies are used and could be used in combination with, for example, plastic recycling to feed these new feedstocks into the value chain. Also, here we see a competition with other waste streams and application of these waste streams. Over the years, there's been quite some attention on indirect land use challenges for biomass production, but maybe since there's quite some policy on this, maybe the big barrier to implementation for biomass projects in the chemical value chain is currently the challenge of controversy is spillover. And do know that Leiden University is quite some research into this topic, but the idea of escalating controversy from other applications of biomass, for example, biomass used for electricity production or for fuel production, and that controversy spills over into discussions on chemical production. So the third candidate, prime candidate for the use of alternative feedstocks, alternative drop-in feedstocks for the chemical value chain is carbon captured at different industrial processes or even through direct air capture. Also here, similar routes could be used, isotropic routes or methanol routes. And also here, there are quite some challenges that especially pertain to the direct air capture route through the availability of renewable energy, but also because it's quite capital and energy intensive, because there we need to make some steps in technology readiness level. Well, what you could see emerging if we add up all these changes in this value chain is a type of hybrid value chain where various different technologies are used to feed in drop-in feedstocks at very different stages of this value chain. In addition to still quite substantial hydrocarbon fractions that are coming from oil and gas. Maybe if I show this diagram also at industry conferences, there are typically three types of questions that come up. The first one is this diagram exhaustive? And I must say, no, it's not exhaustive. And also I'm trying to make it exhaustive. There are, and I know especially in research labs, also other technologies that are being pursued. I think these are key technologies that are used and where we actually see advancements and pilots popping up all over the world. The second comment is, people saying, well, I don't see my subcategory of chemical production in the diagram yet, but that's because there's quite some innovation in the value chain, and people hoping that next year their product could also be produced through either one of these routes or maybe novel routes to produce this specific chemical product from a non-fossil resource. Maybe the third one is actually the question that is asked most often, and that is, having this overview, what do you think is the most pressing and the most promising process technology and pilot projects to feed in those new alternative feedstocks in the value chain? At the moment, you could say that's the $1 million question. And also because there's quite some new policy coming up and quite some influencing on the policy, and companies also hoping that their technology will be the new one and the prime candidate. Well, apart from that, I think it's important that we need various many routes, because the volumes to be replaced oil and gas are very large. In addition to that, I think also important to mention really from a policy side is that you could say that the energy transition, and especially energy transition policy, is ahead about 20 years. Or to frame it for the other side, circularity policy is about 20 years behind on energy transition policy. And that has a number of consequences, and that also, well, that's a focus of part of our publication. One of those consequences is that there is indeed a competition for resources, but also that we see again a type of byproduct production. This byproduct production now is fossil naphtha from fossil just oil and gas for fuel production. What we see is that, for example, through the Renewable Energy Directive, important directive to increase the level of renewable fuels, that we see quite some investments in biorefineries. These biorefineries produce, in addition to, for example, HVO or a biodiesel, also produce biopropane or bionaphtha as byproduct, and actually that push that renewable naphtha that's pushed into the market is I would say, a larger factor for change than the pull currently from circularity policy or from changing demand. Also, for example, where you see this very vividly is the production of FAME diesel. If you go to the fuel station currently, you have a diesel car, then there is up to 7% of FAME diesel blended into the diesel pool. That's FAME diesel. In that process, also glycerin is produced as byproduct, and glycerin can be used to produce epoxy resins. Currently, about 74% of all renewable polymers are these epoxy resins, and that's not really a change that appeared as the result of any demand or circularity policy, but just through fuel policy. If you then go back to the question of how to accelerate this feedstock transition, I think I would like to highlight 3 of the points we make in our recent publication. I think it's very important to, first of all, find some more common ground that what we actually mean by our resources or feedstocks or raw materials. Currently, in quite some of the policy debates, it's a bit abstract. Well, what we suggest or as a future area for attention is, for example, look at how that really works for hydrogen, to have a more resource-focused and concrete discussion, and the lessons that can be learned there. I saw last week or a week before that indeed in the Netherlands, and the new national program on circular economy was published, and you slightly start to see a little bit more focus on actually products. I think that's also the ambition, but I think it's just a challenge and development where we're currently in. Well, secondly, like I mentioned, it's good to really recognize how the value chain is actually changing, and also through these multifaceted effects of fuel policy that, at the one side, obstruct the transition in chemicals through the competition for resources, but also actually incentivize at this moment the feedstock transition, and especially in the Netherlands, it can be very attractive also to attract new bio and e-refineries or waste refineries, really to increase the pace of the feedstock transition. And then lastly, if we would like to go beyond and increase the pace of the feedstock transition even further, we could consider implementing an additional policy mechanism, if this is the aspiration. And for this, there are various options. One of the options is to look at what system worked or is being applied to increase renewable fuel use in the Netherlands. That's the HVA system. It's a credit and it's a tradable credit system where there's an obligation, and then producers of renewable fuels that bring fuels to market can either produce those renewable fuels or buy credits from others that did produce it, and in this way these targets are reached. But also there are other options. For example, what is discussed currently in Brussels is including waste incineration across the EU in the ETS system, and in this way waste incineration becomes more expensive, and recycling techniques will be more competitive. So I think what is actually needed is an informed debate about these policy instruments and the pros and the cons of these various different instruments, and also about at what level, at the EU level or national level, these policies work best. I think we're transitioning to this more informed debate, but there are quite some challenges. I'm happy to discuss those challenges if there are any questions. I did also bring some backup slides, but maybe this is a good just first start also for discussion for this talk. So thanks for the attention.
Thank you, Jasper. And yes, I would like to thanks for the presentation. I think it's also good to see if there are no questions in the chat yet, but I would like to start with a question maybe. So I find it really interesting that you talk a lot about the possibilities in terms of inflows and outflows and how you can connect it to each other. I'm not sure. I didn't, to be honest, I didn't really look at the report, but did you also quantify that? Because there's a lot of questions about, okay, so you might use some waste flows here and there, and you might use some biorefineries, and therefore you would need, let's say, primary feedstocks flowing in. So did you quantify these possibilities and see which options are most attractive from that perspective?
Mm-hmm. Well, though I really get your point about I think what we really want collectively is to quantify this system. And what is really challenging is that if you look, for example, at CBS numbers in the Netherlands, then we have energy balances, but we don't have chemical balances. So I think that is a challenge that we're currently in, and to collectively try to get a better understanding of actually how chemicals are flowing and how carbon is flowing to our economy. For the report, it's qualitative research, but I of course looked into some of the numbers. For example, if you look at the point that is made about the production of byproducts, what you see is that that effect of biofuel production. If you look at current aviation mandates, last year aviation fuel mandates were proposed to have a certain percentage of sustainable aviation fuel that is consumed. Well, if you look at the byproducts that are produced in those processes, you could see in 2050 that about 2 to 5 megatons of byproducts would be generated that could be used in the chemical industry. Well, that really are rough calculations, maybe more back of the envelope calculations than anything more. But just gives the scale of the volumes. Maybe also to compare it to currently about 30 megatons of naphtha is being consumed in chemical processes across Europe. So 5 due to aviation mandates maximum. That's the upper side. It's maybe small or modest compared to the 30 megatons that are currently consumed, but it's quite large if you compare it to the current numbers of renewable feedstock that are being consumed, because that's rather small.
Yeah, I think actually back of the envelope calculations can be extremely useful here, because it's really about orders of magnitude. You want to know how much is currently being used in this industry, how much could be available through secondary resources, how much hydrogen would you need if you want to go Fischer-Tropsch and direct capture, and these type of back of the envelope calculations can give you really an idea about the scales that we're talking about, and what solutions are real solutions and what solutions are just, well, there might be a solution for, let's say, 1% of the whole thing, but it's not really a solution to the whole issue. So I think back of the envelope calculations would be extremely useful here to do, and maybe I'm not sure. So if you haven't done that yet, I think that would be, for example, an excellent student project to just start calculating and yeah, so, to get some kind of feeling with the numbers, etc. Yeah.
No, I really agree about these back of the envelope calculations, and I must say we are also involved in a number of projects also with different universities about calculations. Here I do know that at the University of Utrecht, Professor Gert-Jan Kramer was also working on this, and one of his students, Paco, he also well, we had close contact also about his calculations, and what he for the first time did is actually quantify the carbon consumption currently that's being used in the Dutch economy just based on CBS numbers. So that's kind of a basis that thing that's out there now, and on top of that, it could be very useful actually to really look at order of magnitude, but also at more concrete what could be the contribution of these various technologies. Therefore, for example, you see also the carbon transition model by ISPT that's currently developed, and I think it's online currently. Well, I think in addition, that's also a bit the point I'd like to make in this contribution, that in addition to having this really understanding that is needed about the physical system, it be somehow need to match that with the policy discussions that are currently ongoing and are sometimes a bit, you could say, awkward or strange if you look at the physical reality. So there's a matching challenge here, I would say as well.
Yeah, and I think that actually these back of the envelope calculations can help policymakers a lot. So I think there's a connection there to be made. I see that Bartolomeus raised his hand.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I worked for Carbon Minds and Raalmees. I don't know if you know about them. I wrote my thesis about this topic.
Oh, sorry. Didn't get the first comment you made. I think the connection was a bit.
Carbon Minds and Raalmees. May be familiar to you. Yeah, I wrote my thesis with them about this topic and about the German chemical industry, though. And what I discovered was that, of course, the transition to a climate neutral or a zero carbon chemical industry is a lot connected to the transition of the energy industry, like to green energy production. And then the second thing, if in your slides, when you're looking at the different recycle loops, there was one loop which is very little discussed, and I wanted to ask what your opinion on it is, and it's the direct use of biomaterial as substitution of what we today call plastics, so packaging material and so on, and what that would imply for scaling down the loop, so scaling down the content of carbon in our plastic and organic chemical system, because are we even able to exchange and drop in with our current energy system or even future energy system and biomass availability? So the question is there maybe a smarter transition to directly drop in with organic solutions in the direct use phase instead of going over the breakdown and production up kind of path? Have you looked into that?
Yeah, Well, what we go back to, I think, this slide. What I try to I hope that I understand your question correctly. I think well, in addition to indeed using different drop-in feedstocks, where we see currently more attention, of course, you also have the whole, I would say, area of attention of really coming up with new products or different applications of products, and that could be, for example, direct uses of other materials, biomass or paper directly. And that is, I think, a very important area of both research and also of policy making, where we already see some attention, and also for a lot of current debates about just maybe phasing out for example, in packaging, you really see that. But in addition to packaging, you also have a lot of other applications of organic chemicals that are maybe less transparent or well known. A company like BASF has 40,000 products, so a lot of products to produce and to see what alternatives are available. So in addition they will also come with their own benefits, but also challenges. So in addition to focusing on this side, I think that there's now more an increasing focus on changing current existing products with alternative feedstocks. But I agree, there indeed we need an integral way of looking at it, and there is this challenge or problem that we could end up making with, for example, biomass products that are quite inefficient to make through this route. And for example, there is also the debate about using polyolefins or polyesters. Might be more efficient to keep the oxygen molecule in the project and not get it out, and you spend a lot of energy on getting it out and getting a quite low energy product. So indeed, you need to balance these discussions. Yeah, and I think also here just having more qualitative insight in actually what is happening in this sector, where we until now didn't really have a lot of detail about actually what is flowing through the system and how new products could change that is best beneficial. So I agree with your point. I don't have the quantitative numbers yet, but I think it's actually a challenge collectively to come up with these numbers and a better understanding about how other uses of biomass could help here or might be a challenge or problem. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. I think that the idea of the question is that when you look at the transition pathway, there are certain technologies which come in first, and that is biomass substitution. And then depending on the electrification and your state of renewable energy sources in your energy mix, then carbon capture utilization comes in, and then electrification comes in hydrogen substitution. And if you can scale down the amount of organic chemicals in your system, then there are certain technology changes you don't even come up to. And that's, I think, this like integrated, it's not just nice to see, I think it's also rudimentary to being able to see what technologies we need to focus on in the future. And I just haven't seen that approach yet, so it'd be really interesting to see if that's possible even. It's just an idea. Thank you.
Yeah, it was also very interesting. Maybe a marginal abatement curve and then focused on different technologies. I haven't seen these either. I think also maybe marginal abatement curves focused on chemical production. You also hide quite some details in the assumptions that you make, and also because there are also quite some non-technical challenges. It's I think important to also consider these, and that's not always as simple as the abatement curve suggests. But I agree that it would be a very good contribution to have also in this field.
Thanks. I also have a question in the chat from Sander Peters, RVO, the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. And he asks, so practice shows that collection of plastics for reuse is a major challenge, while plastics use is expected to double by 2030. What is the industry thinking about tackling this bottleneck?
Well, it's hard to say for me what the industry thinks, but I can try to still answer the question. And you can answer it in various different ways. And indeed, I think already I included at the start the IEA numbers, where indeed you see on a global scale this challenge, that not only the demand for plastics is really rising due to GDP growth and also just growing population, and so even with quite rapidly increasing collection and use rates of recycled plastics, you still have a challenge. So that is actually the gap that needs to be filled with other technologies once we would like to make the system more circular. In the Netherlands, I find it a bit more difficult to answer this question. What also is, I think, important to consider is really the size of this chemical cluster that's located in this part of Europe. It's very substantial, and it's way bigger than actually the amount of plastic waste that is produced could ever fill. We did, together with TNO, we did also some more back of the envelope calculations, and just also to see the size, if you like to just to have the Rotterdam port and then have all the processes done there and then fed by plastic waste. Well, there you need to import huge amounts of plastic waste, because you will never have enough. You need to import about the whole production of plastic waste in the whole EU to only produce to replace the fossil streams that are going into Rotterdam. So there you really need this hybrid system that I was talking about. Yeah, so yeah, and actually there's also a comment that I think there's actually that's also the title of the publication. There's actually we have this paradoxical situation where we like to decarbonize our industry, but we actually need the carbon, and we have a scarcity of carbon that can be used to produce these products. So what I think that the industry thinks about this is that, yeah, we need new projects to use alternative feedstocks, and we have quite a number of pilot projects. But if we would like to really reach these ambitions of being fully circular and halfway there in 2030, then we need to scale up those pilot projects. And therefore we need also in addition to new demand, also new policy incentives to make these investments viable. I think that's the debate we're currently in.
Yeah, thanks. And related to that, so my question would be indeed if it comes to policy, because I think basically what you see in these types of situations is that all kinds of circularity strategies, whether it's metals or whether we're talking about carbon feedstocks. I think what industry does is optimize, let's say, within the boundaries that are set by government policies. Because if you just would go for market economics, especially at the moment, I mean, the cheap way to go is basically hydrocarbons, and that's it, right? So if you really would want to make this circular, what kind of policy incentives would the industry need, or what kind of policy incentives would they prefer in order to make this happen? I mean, you could think about general things like carbon pricing, which might give a push in this direction, but there might be also alternative types of policies that are needed, and it might also be so that chemical industry prefers some of these policies more than others, let's say.
No, I really understand this question, and really is also, I think it's the way of looking at the system. Also with the multidisciplinary background, that you have a fiscal system, and we have a layer of economics that optimizes indeed the production of these products, fiscal products. But we have the institutional layer that kind of sets the boundaries. And of course, in practice, we have a lot of discussions in these layers, and they need to be aligned. And there's discussion also in the economic, we could say, company layer about what policies would actually a preference. What I and what also we, I think, see is that there is a preference for market-based instruments, have some clear goal, but actually have, and this bit of maybe a Northwest European way of looking at it, have an obligation, know what needs to be produced, but also have a kind of a market system to then reach the obligation. Well, I think what is furthermore important to stress is really what level of policy making you should address this question. And I think then just looking at national level is quite small, and actually you need European law and European systems. So what we already mentioned in the first publication in this series, it was published in 2021. It's just what policy instruments could be considered, and then indeed including waste incineration in the ETS system. That is an intervention that you could consider. A challenge is always there that you need agreement of 27 member states, and there are also member states that might have more landfilling and don't want to include their waste incineration in the ETS system. Well, there are possibilities also within the old ETS regulation to look at coalitions, for example, have specific countries in Northwest Europe, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Germany, also having a big cluster of seeing whether a subsection of all the countries could include waste incineration in the ETS system. Well, what actually happened is that the Netherlands came up with a carbon levy, with an emission levy, and that also focused on waste incineration. So there's only a national instrument and not really a aligned instrument. And on top of that, we now have the discussion in Brussels to include waste incineration throughout the EU in the ETS. So things are moving, maybe not always in the most logical way, because I think it would be most efficient and logical to have it on the highest level, but it can be challenging due to political reasons. But you could also think of a number of other policy interventions. What in the publication we mentioned, we made a comparison with the fuel incentives, the ABA system. What I would hope, maybe it's also a good thing to add, is that also we look at the Dutch Parliament currently and the discussion going on there sometimes. There is a preference to come up with a specific intervention, for example, a tax on virgin plastic, and then without considering other options, the question is asked, could this measure be implemented? Well, actually, what I hope is that we would ask the question of, okay, we would like to achieve this target. Could we make a comparison of different policy interventions, and what are the pros and cons of the different policy interventions? Instead of looking at them one by one, have a kind of a comparison. And I didn't perform that comparison myself, I think, but I think that could be part of, for example, discussions, and also, for example, a national program on circular economy of having such a comparison. And I haven't seen it yet. Maybe it's discussed, but I haven't seen it.
Yes, I think that would indeed be very useful, that you can also see the pros and cons of these different options, and also the effectiveness, basically, and the efficiency, all important, of course. Yeah, I think with that, I think we come to the end of this session. I would like to thank you again, Jasper, for sharing your ideas on this. I think this is I think it's a very interesting topic, and it's also a problematic topic in the sense that everybody's talking about the energy transition, and this whole feedstock thing is often overlooked. So I think it's really important that there's some attention for that. Work in progress, I would argue, and things to be done. So thanks again, Jasper, for joining us in this Circular Industries Talks, and for all of you, thanks for attending, and see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation and having the opportunity. And if there are any questions, please know how to find us at the Clingendael International Energy Program. I fully agree, there's lots to be done. So we could always follow up later to see the developments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Bye.